I sensed something was wrong when our waiter wondered aloud if the rest of my group was running behind. I returned his question with a practiced, polite smile and assured him, "They're on their way." Of course, that wasn't true. I had booked a table at the Blue Willow Bistro a week earlier. There were 6 spots, one for every person I imagined would want to toast with me. My mother, Celia Harrington. My brother, Ben Harrington. My cousin, Danielle Price. My uncle, Stephen Price. My best friend from college, Jamie Chen. And myself. Yet apparently, I was the only one who had actually arrived. I didn't feel angry. At least not yet. I wasn't really sad either. I just felt humiliated. I found myself sitting in that silent window-side booth, dressed up fancier than usual. I had even forced myself into a pair of heels, despite loathing them. Every so often, I glanced over at the entrance, holding on to a faint hope that someone would come racing in, grinning and apologizing. The only person who appeared, though, was Samuel, returning to check if I was ready. I placed my order, requested the wine menu, and selected a bottle I hadn't tried in ages. As I watched time slip by, I made an effort to keep my composure, trying to appear unfazed. I browsed through my inbox, opened up Instagram, and responded to a handful of Slack messages for work. Really? I was doing anything to avoid appearing like someone who'd just been forgotten by my own relatives. There was always a chance they were simply delayed, or maybe caught up in traffic, perhaps something else entirely. Suddenly, my phone screen flashed with a notification. A message had arrived from my mother. When I tapped it open, I braced myself for either an apology, or at minimum, a quick note saying they'd arrive soon. Instead, I saw the words, "You're not exactly a priority right now. We'll catch up soon. Enjoy your dinner." I reread it once, then again, as if focusing hard enough might somehow turn the text into something less harsh. The words never changed. That was all there was. No apology. No words of congratulations. Just an empty silence. A courteous rejection disguised as politeness. I let my gaze drift across the space. The Blue Willow Bistro hummed quietly with snatches of laughter, clattering glassware, birthday choruses, and then just me. I stayed at my table with my glass of wine, immersed in my quiet, surrounded by 6 vacant seats. At that point, I hadn't yet realized that the text was more than a simple note. It was the final bit of proof I needed for something I'd chosen not to see for so long. I was never truly included in those festivities. My only purpose was to foot the bill. That same night, I returned to my apartment without even switching on the lights. Perched on the edge of my bed, still wearing my heels and gripping my phone, I stared at that text as if it were a snapshot of a time I desperately wished to forget, but couldn't look away from. The message, "You're not exactly a priority right now," kept repeating in my thoughts, echoed by all the other memories. Every small moment I had brushed off as just how families act now seemed to confirm it. Each birthday they missed slipped quietly past, proof I tried not to see. The countless nights when my cousin Danielle needed rent money for just a month, and I took care of it, never hearing a word of thanks, much less seeing the money returned. All those late-night calls from Ben at 1 a.m., desperate for help yet again because his third startup had collapsed. It wasn't just that my contributions were ignored. My energy was being sapped from me. When my father passed away, everything slowly unraveled, like a tiny leak gradually caving in a roof. At first, stepping up to help didn't bother me. I worked in marketing, earned a solid salary, and saw no reason not to help out. Since I had no children or partner, I figured that was simply how family operated. But what began as an occasional favor turned into a monthly expectation, then an obligation, and eventually a mandate. I started handling the mortgage for the house I'd moved out of when I was just 22. It didn't happen overnight. I was covering portions until, one day, I noticed most of the payments were coming from me. When my mother, Celia, lost her job, I started covering the utility bills as well. I took on a second job. I even purchased a pre-owned car for my brother, Ben, after he wrecked his first one. I even picked up the tab for the food at our last Thanksgiving gathering, where not a single person checked in on how I was feeling. Everyone was too preoccupied with applauding my brother Ben's latest ambitious entrepreneurial plan. Yet another scheme. "You're just so good at handling everything," my mother would remark in that gentle, calming voice she always used. "Not everyone is made the way you are, honey." And I bought into that. I convinced myself that being competent obligated me to take care of everyone else. Since I was able to manage everything, I believed it was my responsibility to do so. I reassured myself that everything I did was for a purpose, providing stability, protection, and creating a more resilient family. But honestly, it was comfort for them, paid for by me. The hardest truth was admitting how unaware I had been that I was slowly fading away. I didn't recognize it until I glanced at that vacant dining table and noticed 6 seats reserved for people who never really saw me, people who never seemed to think I was worth the effort to actually show up for. And honestly, what stings even more than simply being overlooked is being taken advantage of and then disregarded. A few months prior to that dinner, my brother Ben came to me seeking assistance with a down payment. He kept the details murky, vaguely describing it as a project, and assuring me he'd return the money within the month. I transferred $1,500 to him quietly, not saying a thing. Later on, it was Danielle who, of all people, let slip that Ben had actually spent the money on a motorcycle. When I brought it up to my mother, she only gave a half-hearted shrug. "He's doing something for himself," she replied. "It's not as though there's anyone else making sure he's okay." I looked at my mother in disbelief. "So tell me, who's been keeping an eye out for me?" She remained silent, simply giving my hand a consoling pat as if I were being overly sensitive. I always give my support. That's just the kind of person I am. Perhaps that was true. Maybe it was something that had been instilled in me, molded and reinforced over time. I became the reliable daughter, the problem solver, the person who never asks for help because everyone believes I already have everything I could need. Yet that evening, as I sat in the shadows with my shoes still on and my phone's glow scorching my hand, I finally understood something I should have acknowledged a long time ago. Being seen as strong doesn't equate to being more loved. It just means others expect you to handle more. And for 7 years, they called my actions generosity. But to me, it always felt like a duty. It wasn't until after that meal that I began to recognize it for what it truly was. Debt. Not just in money, but in emotions too. I can't recall how much time I spent that night browsing through previous transfers, old messages, and family pictures, searching for the instant I faded into the background. Perhaps that had been my reality all along. Perhaps I just didn't want to face the truth. When my phone vibrated again, I paused, still holding on to a sliver of hope that it was someone reaching out for the right reasons. But it was just another attempt at contact, with no apology for their mistake or any concern about how I was doing. Instead, a photograph arrived from my cousin, Danielle. It took a moment for the picture to finish loading, but once it appeared, a cold stillness hit my chest. There was everyone: my mother, my brother, my cousin, and my uncle, posed together outside Quayside Grill House, all beaming while holding glasses of wine. My brother stood at the front, a glossy black motorcycle key in one hand and a peace sign in the other. His jacket was crisp and unworn, and his watch gleamed as though it was brand new. Printed underneath was the caption, "Celebrating the Dreamer." At last, my brother had his turn to be celebrated. I gaped at the photo, unable to make sense of what I was seeing. Nobody had told me about any plans. Nobody let me know they were going out that evening, And absolutely nobody had informed me that my brother, Ben, had gotten a brand new motorcycle, paid for in part with my down payment, just a few weeks prior. Then I noticed the timestamp. The message from my mother, the one saying, "You're not exactly a priority right now," had actually been sent just an hour before the picture was snapped. I realized they hadn't simply forgotten about me, they'd chosen to leave me out. Not only did they skip my promotion celebration, but they used the money I gave them to host a party just for my brother, and didn't even bother to make up an excuse. That type of realization doesn't arrive with anger. It comes with a hush. It's a stillness so piercing that it shreds every justification I've offered for the people who should have cared about me. Ben hadn't really deserved that moment. He just took it in. And I was the one who ended up paying the price. I mean that literally. They described him as the dreamer, the one full of promise. Meanwhile, I was always the safety net, the person catching everyone else, the one who was always overlooked, until I finally let go of the rope. That night, I didn't shed a tear. I didn't yell, hurl my phone, or message anyone back. Instead, I quietly got to my feet, slipped off my shoes, and padded over to the kitchen, where I topped off my wine, opened my laptop, and navigated to an old spreadsheet I hadn't looked at in years. This document was titled, "Family Support, Private, Do Not Delete." There was a separate tab for each person, every row organized by date, covering rent assistance, bill transfers, last-minute car repairs, groceries, holiday gifts, and co-signed loans, all neatly highlighted by recipient. When I scrolled to the end of the final tab, the total displayed was $73,142. That was what I had quietly provided, bit by bit, over 7 years. Something unsettling happens when you see your affection broken down into lists. It isn't really the money that matters. It's more about the effort, the mental energy, and the unspoken expectation that I'll always come through. And every single time, I had stepped up, until that moment. I launched the banking app and signed into the joint mortgage account that my mother had needed me to help manage for a while after my father passed away. The payment deadline was in 6 days, with the amount set at $1,360. Autopay was still active, scheduled to withdraw funds from my account on the 18th of every month. I canceled it instantly, acting without a second thought. There wasn't any warning prompt, no message designed to make me reconsider my choice, just a simple green check confirming it was complete. I gazed at my phone for several seconds before grabbing my keys. The night air outside was frigid, still, and sharp. It was one of those evenings where it felt as if the universe was holding its breath on my behalf. Arriving at my mother's house, I noticed all the lights were out. I chose not to ring the doorbell. I didn't stick around either. I found a sticky note in my bag, wrote a short 5-word message, and pressed it to the front door. I decided it was time to let him handle it now. Beneath that line, in smaller script, I added, "You taught me to put everyone else's needs before my own, but you never showed me how to look after myself." After that, I turned away, returned to my car, and headed back to my house. There was no music, and I didn't shed any tears, just the low murmur of the engine and the pronounced, even rhythm of my heartbeat. While some people declare their boundaries in long speeches, I chose to draw mine with a quiet exit and a sticky note. The following morning, I awoke to 27 missed calls. 8 were from my mother, 4 from my brother, 3 from my cousin, and 1 from my uncle. There were several others from unfamiliar numbers, but I didn't take the time to find out who they were. Although I ignored all the calls, I did go through and listen to the voicemails. The initial message was from my mother. Her tone was strained and panicked, as if she was putting on a brave front, yet couldn't stop her composure from breaking with each word. "Harper, what have you done? I received a call from the bank today. They told me the mortgage payment hadn't cleared. I can't just make a move like this and not say a word when Ben is finally on the right track. I'm about to mess up all of our progress. This isn't the way a family should act. I kept replaying that last part in my mind. This isn't the way a family should act. It was almost ironic. I could have sworn that understanding how families act also meant ignoring your daughter on what was supposed to be the biggest night of her life. The second voicemail was from my brother, Ben. His tone was defensive, annoyed, filled with a sense of entitlement he didn't bother to hide. Honestly, you just yanked everything with zero notice. You're sending Mom into a panic. We had things under control. You could have at least had a conversation with us beforehand. It almost made me laugh. A conversation, like the ones they had with me before that big celebratory dinner, where I never even got an invitation. Danielle left the third message. That one hurt the most, because she didn't even try to pretend otherwise. All right. Unbelievable. So now you're blaming the entire family for missing a single dinner. Grow up, Harper. I always act like I'm some sort of martyr, as though I'm the only one who puts in any effort. But just so I know, Ben's been grinding as well. He finally catches a break, yet I turn the spotlight back onto myself. That one really lingered for me. One dinner, as if that was all there was to it. Not the countless years of unnoticed effort, not the financial sacrifices, not the birthdays I spent alone, not the reality that they always celebrated themselves, using my resources, but never celebrated me. For Danielle, though, it was nothing more than one dinner. I remained on my sofa, phone in hand, flipping through the missed calls as if they were fragments of a mystery I could never piece together into an apology. Nobody offered any apologies. Nobody even checked to see if I was all right. Their only worry was that something had stopped functioning for them. It was never truly about what I contributed. The significance lay in how silently I offered support. When I kept my mouth shut, I served a purpose. As soon as I refused, I became the problem. Later that afternoon, I received a message from Jamie Chen, my best friend from college, the only person who probably understood more about my family than anyone else I knew. Hey, my mother just mentioned that she called and said I'm falling apart, possibly having a breakdown. Am I all right? I stared at that message for several moments before responding. No, I'm not falling apart. I just finally stopped moving. Jamie didn't press for details, and instead sent a brief reply. Seriously proud of you. For some reason, those words landed more powerfully than anything else I heard that day, since it was the first time someone didn't expect me to clarify, to repair, or to pretend I was fine for everyone else. Jamie simply acknowledged me. The more I reviewed those voicemails, the more obvious things became. I hadn't let down my family. What I really did was stop being the person they could always rely on. In their eyes, that alone was something I couldn't be forgiven for. I never thought anyone from my family would actually stand up for me. So later that night, when my phone lit up with my uncle's name, I hesitated to answer. There was always something unique about my Uncle Stephen. He had a softness, a calmness about him. He was the quiet one at every family event, never joining in when tension rose. Instead, he would quietly observe everything from the outskirts, much like I did. So I picked up. Hello, I answered, keeping my tone composed. There was a brief silence on his end, as if my uncle was trying to collect his thoughts. He eventually said, "You really need to call your mother. She's falling apart." I didn't say anything at first, and let the quiet linger. "Is that what she told you?" I finally asked. "Am I the reason for all of this?" She claimed she didn't realize I felt so excluded. I gave a short, humorless chuckle. She was unaware, so she sent me a text. Stephen reached out and told me directly that I wasn't a priority, using those very words. Once again, he fell into silence. That quiet pause communicated more than any explanation could. I have a feeling he understood, in some small way, deep down. He believed I'd always take charge of those things. He said it with no hardness or attempt to defend himself, just sincere truthfulness. I told him everyone operated that way. People always expected I'd take responsibility, that I'd pick up the pieces, that I would always be there no matter what. He let out a rough, weary breath. He said, "You never fit the role of the weak one. You simply gave too much to everyone." That statement, as unadorned as it was, lingered with me because it was the first time someone in my family recognized reality for what it was, instead of twisting it. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I experienced something close to relief. It wasn't that I needed someone to validate my perspective, but rather that someone finally recognized who I truly was. It didn't solve anything, but it reassured me that walking away wasn't unreasonable. 4 days after I canceled the mortgage payment, my mother showed up at my apartment unexpectedly. She hadn't called beforehand or asked whether I was around. She simply showed up. When I answered the door, my mother was standing there holding a tote in one hand and an old photograph in the other. I recognized it right away. It was a picture of me at age 9, wearing a sunflower costume in my kindergarten play. My mother always said that was her favorite photo of me. I didn't ask her to come in. I just moved aside. I watched as she entered the place slowly, as if she were stepping into someone else's home. Her gaze darted around the space, taking in the walls, shelves, and furniture. There were no family pictures, no memorabilia, no evidence of her presence. "You changed the decor," she whispered. I responded that I'd gotten rid of things that didn't fit. Celia recoiled. I shifted a little, then lowered myself onto the very edge of the sofa, gripping the photograph more firmly in my hands. "We're going to lose our home," my mother said softly. I gave a small nod, as I'd already guessed as much. Her tone wavered with emotion. "You have the power to change this. Just one phone call to the bank and—" "No," I interrupted flatly. Celia stared at me, as if the meaning of the word escaped her. She echoed, "No." "I'm not phoning the bank," I insisted. "I will not make the payment. I'm finished." Her expression turned steely. "This isn't just a financial issue. This concerns our family," she insisted. A bitter laugh almost escaped me, but I kept it inside. "No," I said again. "It's entirely about money, because to you, that's the only thing I've ever represented." "That's not a fair thing to say," my mother argued. "You sent me a text," I cut in, "on the night of my promotion dinner, and told me I didn't matter, while you were busy celebrating Ben and his new motorcycle, the one I helped pay for." Celia opened her mouth, maybe to argue, yet no words came out. "You didn't even bother acting like you felt guilty," I said. "You never apologized. You didn't check to see if I arrived home all right. It took the mortgage bouncing before you showed any concern." My mother, Celia Harrington, lowered her gaze to the photograph she held in her lap. "I didn't understand the full extent of what you were paying for," she murmured. "That's exactly it," I responded. "You avoided understanding it. You preferred that I handle it all without drawing attention, so you wouldn't need to face it." She shook her head gently. "Ben isn't like you. He requires extra support." "No," I responded with a steady but unwavering tone. "He needs to face the consequences." She looked up at me, her eyes shimmering with tears. "He's your brother, and I'm your mother." Everything went quiet. "I couldn't accept the idea of you just leaving," my mother said softly. "I didn't leave," I answered. "I simply stopped allowing myself to be taken advantage of." Her fingers gripped the photo more tightly. I could practically see her searching for some familiar approach, some tactic from the past. That approach had always worked before, whether it was guilt, sorrow, or dodging responsibility. Yet now, none of it had any effect on me. Celia asked, "What should we do now?" "I have no idea," I replied. "You'll have to figure it out. just as I had, the way grown-ups are supposed to. She locked eyes with me for what felt like ages, and right then, I stopped seeing her as my mother. Instead, I was looking at a woman who had grown so accustomed to leaning on her daughter's strength that she had lost sight of her own need to be resilient. Finally, my mother got to her feet, straightened her blouse, and grabbed her purse. She paused at the threshold and glanced over her shoulder once more. "Is this really the ending?" she wanted to know. I hesitated before responding. My mind raced through lonely birthdays and phone calls that only came during crises. The never-ending loop of giving and remaining invisible haunted me. "This is the end of me pretending what we had was love," I whispered. My mother didn't try to debate it. She simply nodded, pushed the door open, and stepped outside. The door closed quietly behind her. No slamming, no shouting, no sense of finality, only stillness. Yet this time, the silence felt justified rather than hollow. It seemed deserved. The following afternoon, I looked into the joint mortgage account. Nobody had made any payments. No attempts had been made at all. It was clear everyone was waiting for me to give in, to be the more mature person, just like always. By midday, the family thread exploded with activity. Danielle changed its name twice in 2 hours. Emergency, mortgage crisis, family unity chat. The final name included a broken heart and a waving hand emoji. I muted the conversation. I ignored the messages, except for one occasion when I opened them just to read a message from Stephen. In his text, he wrote, "I told them this was inevitable. You weren't ever weak. You were simply more giving than needed." I took a screenshot and saved it, because spending years uncertain of my value meant that sometimes one clear moment of understanding could feel as protective as armor. 3 days later, I received a call from the bank. The woman on the other end requested to speak to me directly, slightly mispronouncing my name before clearing her throat. "We've noticed the last 2 mortgage payments haven't gone through," she explained. "Is there a particular reason for the break?" I replied in a steady voice. "I am not the one responsible for this account. I took my name off the title 3 years ago, and any help I offered was simply voluntary." She hesitated for a moment. "I see. But the homeowner listed you as the point of contact for financial matters," she continued, mentioning that I had always managed it. Naturally, she did. That was the strategy, wasn't it? I remained silent, did nothing, and waited, expecting someone else would once again step in to save her. But that was no longer my role, I told her. There was another, much longer silence on the line. Eventually, she thanked me in a courteous tone and ended the call. Later that day, my brother showed up. He didn't come to my door. He was waiting outside in my parking lot. He parked his sleek, jet-black motorcycle right in front of my apartment complex, as though trying to offer a truce wrapped in questionable decisions. He had on sunglasses at 5:15 p.m. and paced beside the bike, practically shouting into his phone. I chose not to go downstairs. I didn't have to. I already knew how this would go. There would be panic, finger-pointing, distraction, guilt. The cycle would begin again. Instead, I stayed upstairs, silently observing him through the window with my arms folded. For the first time in a very long while, I felt absolutely no responsibility to mend things. I resisted any desire to cushion the impact or shield him from whatever consequences his actions might bring. I simply stood there, motionless and distant, watching. It wasn't a lack of concern on my part that made everything crumble. Things were falling apart because no one had ever learned how to function without relying completely on me. There was no longer any withdrawal to keep someone else's home going. No mortgage payment, no last-minute family bank transfers, no quiet drain from my account while I acted as though it didn't sting. The money belonged solely to me. The total stayed whole on my screen, untouched. For the first time in ages, I felt no shame in seeing that. I felt grounded. I brewed myself a cup of proper coffee, none of the instant I'd settled for before, trying to cut expenses. I took my mug out to the balcony to catch the sunlight on my knees, watching familiar neighbors walk their dogs down the same stretch of trees. Even so, everything seemed different. It wasn't the world that had shifted, but something inside me. Later that day, I closed the joint mortgage account completely, cleared out the old login, canceled all notifications, erased the spreadsheet from my computer, and started a fresh folder in its place, titled with my own name. I put a blank file inside it. The window at the top displayed, "What I owe myself." This was about so much more than finances. It represented hours, tranquility, rest, missed celebrations, and the autonomy to say no without being accused of selfishness. It meant I could ask for what I needed without constantly being reminded that I'd already received more than enough. It signified a place where I could be myself without being taken advantage of. A few days later, I reserved a solo getaway to Barcelona. That destination had been part of my dreams for so long. I splurged on that leather jacket I'd tried on half a dozen times, always persuading myself not to buy it. I enrolled in a weekend class for writers. I dug out the incomplete novel I'd set aside 7 years ago and began reading it again. As I went through every page, I rediscovered the sensation of truly belonging to myself. That evening, my phone vibrated again with a call from an unfamiliar number. I let it ring without picking up. There was no need to answer, because I was already certain what the message would be. Reminders of guilt, anxiousness, pressure, and polite phrasing felt like a veiled plea for assistance from those who couldn't ask for help outright without making it a demand. Because of that, I set my phone face down, refilled my tea, and went back to working on my writing. For some people, family is lost when they choose to leave. For me, my family slipped away the moment they decided I wasn't important. The only thing I did was finally accept that truth.